So I'm going to be presenting part of the line of research that I started a couple of years ago maximum. So I'm also not a super expert on that, but for the type of analysis we have to do here at CENIC and more things that are actually coming, it's going to be, and it's already been a very useful tool, although of course it's complex, you all know it, to apply it properly. So, oops. Okay. I separated talk into parts. First, I will talk about the motivation and theoretical framework, what is Mendelian randomization. And then in the second part, I will show you one case study, how we are applying Mendelian randomization in practice in some of our projects. So I was watching yesterday the seminar by David in the last talk of the reading group. And there was a very interesting discussion about causality and prediction. For us, can be a little bit more abstract, but if you talk to a clinician or even to a biologist, they are never going to agree that something different from a clinical trial or an animal model experiment is causal. It's very hard to convince them that with observational data, we can actually draw causal conclusions. However, of course, more and more data is accumulating in observational studies. And also, for example, here I put two examples of the clinical trials of COVID. It's with this experience, we have seen that the timeline that a clinical trial requires is not something that we can assume in certain situations, like was the COVID. So, of course, as mathematicians, it's, I think, a very interesting approach to try to reuse the data that we gather in observational studies to propose a new mathematical framework that can actually help us to draw causal conclusions from the data. So this, I'm just going to review kind of briefly some concepts that you have already been reviewing during these seminars, so interesting seminars that you have been doing, but I need to put it a little bit in the context. So I didn't know that there is such an animated discussion in Twitter between Julia Pearl and Miguel Hernan, actually, but it's true that they kind of represent the two lines of thought, almost philosophical approaches to causal inference. On the one hand, paired with trying to model the counterfactuals, and Hernan, from my opinion, more in the ground, let's say, trying to implement what was already proposed by Neyman and Rubin years ago, the potential outcomes framework. In sum, what we want to do, if we were, of course, able to measure the outcome of an experiment with both potential possibilities, for example, of a treatment, it would be a straightforward to identify causal relationships, and all the theory behind is to try to infer that from data that is not actually structured as this. So this is a very simple example. What is aspirin actually the cause of stopping from having a headache or not? If we had an experiment in which exactly the same person would take and not take at the same time with the same conditions aspirin, and we could observe the difference in the intensity of the pain after taking aspirin or not taking aspirin, of course, it would be straightforward to decide if is the aspirin the cause of the reduction in the intensity of the pain. We could calculate the treatment effect like this, but unfortunately, this is not observed. So this is something you all know, but again, I need to put it in a context a little bit, what I want to explain you afterwards. So giving a treatment T, in this case, for simplification, is going to be a binomial variable that can take only two values. We want to know its effect on a given outcome. The outcome can be also of any type, But in any case, we will get two random variables, that is the distribution when the treatment takes a value of 1 and the distribution of the outcome when the treatment takes a value of 0. Since I said before, for each individual or unit, talking a little bit more in general, we can only observe one of the situations. We can express this mathematically like this. And this is maybe going to raise some discussion, maybe not. I don't know if you have reviewed it because I entered in the group a little bit later. But this is an interesting paper by Sekholm in 27 that makes the point that in contrast to the usual regression assumptions, the potential outcomes are fixed quantities and not random variables. That's a little bit the basics of all that. So this is an example in which they try to prove the effect of alcohol consumption on cardiovascular disease and mortality using Mendelian randomization. So without entering yet in what Mendelian randomization is, I'm going to try to put this in the context of the potential outcomes framework. We have an outcome that can be of different types and different distributions. Can be a cardiovascular event, acute myocardial infarction, a stroke, arrhythmia, atherosclerosis. Can be death, yes or no. It can also be, for example, a variable that is measuring time to death or time to cardiovascular disease. And we have a treatment variable that in this case is the alcohol consumption that, as I said before, can be taking different values, but for simplification, is going to be yes or no. Is just taking values yes or no. So let's focus, for example, because this is I had a data and I transformed it into time free of acute myocardial infarction measured in years. So we will have some theoretical data. This is what we would like to have. We have some individuals. One individual can be observed both if it was taking and not taking, the other way around, not taking and taking alcohol. We could measure the time free of cardiovascular event, with myocardial infarction in this case. For each of the units, we have the two values, and we can calculate the true average of the two random variables that, as you can see, they are certainly quite different. The observed data is not like this. The observed data is like that. We have, here I call it W, but it's actually T. It's the treatment variable that is the one that is indicating if the person takes or doesn't take alcohol. So as I said in the previous slide, we cannot observe both situations simultaneously. If the person is taking alcohol, the value of the outcome for the situation in which it would not be taking alcohol is unknown. Still, we can calculate the average of both, the estimation of both random variables, taking into account the missing values, and we get two different numbers. One of the reasons why I started working in causal inference is because, of course, it reminded me it's actually a missing data problem, and for that Bayesian statistics is very useful. This is a little bit where I want to go, although I'm not yet there. But anyway, this is a little bit of a comment aside. What we are trying to estimate in any case is for each one of the individuals the treatment effect that can be defined as the difference between the outcome in the treated situation, in this case, if the person takes alcohol, minus the outcome in the non-treated situation. In this case, the person is not taking alcohol. So if the assignment to the treatment was completely random, that would be straightforward. It's not the previous situation. We would also have no problems with confounding. We would assume that the people treated and untreated are by construction coming from the same population. Confounded with a large sample size would also be disregarded. But well, this is just the mathematical formulation for that. So if the treatment assignment is independent of the outcome, in this case, we can simplify and we don't have an expected value for each one of the two situations, treated and untreated. We can summarize them like this, and we can define the average treatment effect as simply the difference in the expected value of the outcome in the treated and in the untreated population. This is probably until now everything what you know. So in the previous situation, the true average treatment effect that we calculate differs very much from the observed average treatment effect. And why is that? Because we don't have a variable that randomizes the assignation of the individuals to the groups. We have other ways to cope with it, but one possibility is to try to transform our data, our observational data, into a randomized control trial, where all the things I said before are true. Confounders are irrelevant. We can assume that all individuals come from the same underlying population, and so on. Here is where we come to the definition of instrumental variables, because this is exactly what we use to transform an observational study into a kind of randomized clinical trial or randomized control trial. What is the novelty or the innovation with Mendelian randomization? The use of genetic variation as instrumental variable. And I will come right now to discuss this a little bit more in detail. One of the advantages of Mendelian randomization, actually, you will see it now, is that we don't have the possibility of reverse causation, because we know that by definition, a gene is the cause of the trait, and it can never be the other way around. So this is one of the advantages. So in what is one of the bases of Mendelian randomization?
Sorry, Fatima, one question.
Yes.
Yeah, so in this case, you don't consider any epigenetics and things like that, right?
No. It's a very simple argument, and actually it's just relying on SNPs. I mean, of course, they say in all the papers, I will show you now some references, any genetic variation that satisfies the requirements of an instrumental variable can be used. But the most frequent way to do this is with SNPs or with polygenic risk scores that I will also define. I think because the way we inherit, that's why I was coming to this slide now, the way in which mutations are inherited is very clear. And it's kind of clear that it's random, some things. If we enter already in epigenetics and so on, the inheritance models are very complicated. So I don't think we could assume that using an epigenetic mark, for example, you can completely randomize your population, while you can assume that if you are using SNPs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So this is for
Fatima.
Yes.
I have another question, if I may ask.
Yes. Yes, sure.
So in your previous slide, there is no arrow from the gene to the trait. That's a very strong assumption.
There is an arrow from the gene to the trait, to the treatment, but not to the exposure. And this is the main assumption. I come now to later to the assumptions. And you are right that this is a very difficult to get assumption, an assumption that is quite hard to fulfill.
Oh, okay. So that's something you are going to discuss later.
Yes.
All right.
I'm
Sorry.
going to talk about that. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. You can interrupt me whenever. So for those of you that are not familiar with these terms I'm going to use, this is the two alleles. These are the two copies of DNA that are in each one of the gametes, one from the mother, one from the father, come together, and one is selected in the offspring through meiosis. So for example, in this case, the mother has a mutation here, and the father has a different, yes, father and mother. The mother has a mutation here, the father has a mutation here, and the offspring inherits the variant from the mother. Here there is a de novo mutation. This sometimes happens also. Here this variant is again inherited from the mother. This would be inherited from the father. This would be inherited from the father. There are some rules about, because this is not completely independent one from another. There are some rules about which mutations are inherited together. But what holds still, even for these pieces of DNA that are inherited together, is that the probability of inheriting mother or father, except for some particular exceptions, in what we are going to talk right now, the kind of variants we are going to use that are these called SNPs, SNPs, this can be assumed that the inherited of the allele from the mother or the allele from the father is random. This is the logic behind. So two definitions so that we can all understand each other. So a mutation is just a DNA nucleotide which is different from the reference genome. And a mutation, and a SNP is a mutation that is present in more than 1% of the population. We all have very different genomes, but this is in general irrelevant. There are a lot of variants, when I talk about variants, sorry, I didn't put this term, I talk about either mutations or SNPs, any kind of difference from the reference genome. We all have a lot of variants. And this is not a problem. A lot of people have it. SNPs are in general, well, not always, but this is what makes the population to be different. But in general, they don't need to be pathogenic. They don't need to be something bad. This is just a little bit more of information, although it's not important for this problem. SNPs can be, maybe this is even too complex without some more background information. But the important part is probably down here. Some mutations don't even introduce any changes in the protein at the next level of complexity. These are the synonymous mutations. Some do, but some might change completely the amino acid and some stop the transcription. So there are different types of SNPs. Sorry, this is too much and this is not really important, okay? So the two important concepts are mutation and SNP, and to know that we can use this as an instrumental variable because the probability of inheriting a variant from the father or from the mother is supposed to be 50% in most of the situations. I'm putting all through the slides some references if you want to read a little bit more about that. Just because the other day we were talking about that, and because as I said before, in principle, you can use any kind of genetic information that fulfills the requirements of an instrumental variable to do that. So anything that is inherited at random could be used. So instead of using one single mutation, we can use a combination of mutations that are combined into what is called polygenic risk score. So basically, we have data from, for example, a case control study, genetic data. That is the one we are going to use for the inference. There is always an independent replication cohort, validation cohort. This GWAS data, this GWAS information are usually very, very large databases. We obtain SNPs, mutations that are associated with a given trait, and then we combine them. You see here, this is the main step, the beta syncage, through actually a yes, elastic net approach, regression approach. We combine these different SNPs that are supposed to be associated one by one with the given trait. We combine them with different weights. And yeah, we do some calculations with the p-values and so on, validate it in the independent population, and we have a combination of SNPs that give us a certain risk for a given disease. When a person comes then with the person's DNA, so this is, for example, your genotype, these are the SNPs that conform one polygenic risk score that, for example, summarizes the risk of acute myocardial infarction, as I said before. So all these SNPs together with these weights, these are the betas of the regression model, put together, they provide a probability of having an acute myocardial infarction. So you come with this is your genotype, these are the actual bases that you have in your DNA, and you get a weight. So for example, your genotype is, we always have 2 alleles of each position, so it's a C and a T. The risk allele is the T and the no risk allele is the C, so it's the same. So we have the whole weight for this SNP. For example, this one, we have 2 times the allele that doesn't confer a risk. That's why we have for this SNP a weight of 0. Here we have 2 times the risky allele. That's why the probability for this allele, the weight for this allele, for this SNP is the double of in the polygenic risk score by definition, and so on. And summing all this, you have your probability of having an acute myocardial infarction. That's a little bit off topic, but as we were discussing about this the other day, I just wanted to try to explain you very, very briefly. The reason why I brought it up is because, as I said before, polygenic risk scores are also started to be used in Mendelian randomization instead of single variants. Might be more robust. So coming already more in detail into Mendelian randomization, this is George Davies Smith, epidemiologist from the MRC in Cambridge. He's one of the most active in the field in the last years, and I strongly recommend this review in Nature by him and by Eleanor Sanderson also. As I said before, the rationale is let's try to use the random segregation of alleles that occurred in a natural manner in all kind of things as a randomization step. Because then it's like if we have a randomized control trial and all the calculations of causal inference are very easy to calculate. So in this case, we would have random allocation to groups for control and treatment. So as I said before, if the sample size is large enough, we can assume that the confounders are affecting in the same way the control and the treatment. What else? Well, we can assume that the whole population is by construction coming from the same general population. So these are all advantages. We can try to do the same with the SNPs in the Mendelian randomization framework. That's the idea behind. Coming a little bit more deeper into the way this is estimated is actually very easy because as we saw before with the potential outcomes framework in this situation, just the expected value. This is an example, for example, in which this is one of the first examples in which they applied Mendelian randomization to try to prove if the levels of CRP, this is the C-reactive protein, this is a marker for inflammation that is known to be very much related to cardiovascular disease. There were many randomized trials testing different medicaments to see if lowering the CRP levels was also lowering, in this case, systolic blood pressure. It was done in particular for this trait. And using Mendelian randomization, we wouldn't need to do this randomized trial because just using the information about genetic variants that are known to be associated with the levels of CRP, we could see if we see also an association with a lowering in the systolic blood pressure, always assuming that this genetic variant is not producing directly a change in the systolic blood pressure. I come now to the assumptions, okay? In this context, if everything holds, it's easy to calculate the treatment effect, just with the expected value of the systolic blood pressure in the individuals that have versus those that do not have the variant. We simply use regression, and the estimate that is normally used is we try to remove the effect of the gene on the CRP, on the protein C reactive, And this is the estimate that we use for inference. But as you see, it's a very, I was a little bit lazy, sorry, to write everything because it was a long time I didn't use LaTeX and now I'm regret it because of course for all these things, but in general, people run away from equations always in my talk. So anyway, what I wanted to show you with that is that it's a very simple estimation. It's a regression model of the trait on the gene, on the genetic variant, and a regression of the outcome on the trait. And we compare these two. This is normally done in the standard packages. I will show you in the example part exactly how I do it with an R package. This is normally a two-stage least square estimation. Alternative methods include likelihood approaches. Of course, here is where we could also use Bayesian methodologies to estimate these numbers. So coming to the assumptions. So this is using mathematical terms. As Ramon was pointing, of course, this is one of the strongest assumptions. In these plots, this is drawn using DATS. So a little bit following all the idea also from Herman. In red, we have, let me remember this, solid red lines show effects that must exist. These are the effects that have to be there so that we can do Mendelian randomization. So it's compulsory that we have a reported effect of the gene on the trait. This means we can only use variants that have been reported in the previous example to lower the levels of protein C reactive, for example. So this has to be true. In dashed red lines are the things that cannot happen. So we cannot have confounders that are affecting in any way the gene and the outcome. And the third assumption is, as we said before, the gene cannot have a direct impact on the outcome, only can do it through the variable that we are trying to prove if it's possible. Okay. So this was in mathematical terms: relevance, exchangeability, exclusion restriction. When we talk to the medical doctors, this is the assumptions are quite simple to understand. So as I said before, the genetic variant is associated with the causal trait. The genetic variant is not associated with any confounder of the effect or outcome association. And assumption 3, the genetic variant is only associated with the outcome through the causal trait. This is an example, the example I was showing you the data before, the paper. So in this case, what does it mean, the three assumptions? First of all, we need to use for the Mendelian randomization calculations, SNPs, mutations that are known to be associated with alcohol consumption. Even if our data is not very large, because in general the effect of SNPs on a trait are not very large in this kind of complex traits. We are not talking about Mendelian diseases. This is a different story. But for this kind of very complex diseases, the impact of each variant is usually not very large. That's why we need very large cohorts to have a positive result here. So we can get information from previous studies. We don't need to use our own data set that is normally smaller. So we select the SNPs that are associated, in this case, with alcohol consumption. There are a lot of studies on this. Then the SNPs cannot be associated with any of the confounders of the association between alcohol consumption and the outcome. For example, any SNP that would be linked to smoking behavior would be problematic because smoking behavior is known to be a confounder between alcohol consumption and the outcome. And third, we cannot take SNPs that are directly linked to cardiovascular disease because in that case, we cannot make the difference between this path and this path. So with all the data that is being published, This is, for example, the UK Biobank. They have a SNP array data for 1 million individuals. This is, I did a quick search in PubMed of the articles that are being published using Mendelian randomization, and this is incredible. It was 2022, 2021, 2020. In the last years, there has been really an explosion on this. Although Neyman 100 years ago almost was already talking about that. Because this explosion, and as Ramon pointed very well, things sometimes are not being done properly. So it's nice to see that epidemiologists are getting aware of it, and they just published, I think this is from 2021, 2022, some guidelines about what do you need to report whenever you are using Mendelian randomization in an epidemiological study. The list is very long. Not everybody is taking this into account, but I think it's a very good thing that they put all these things, they summarized all these things, because we can then do things right. We have to do all these steps, and then we can be kind of sure, although there are things that are still complicated to prove, we can be kind of sure that our conclusions are right.